Do not chase the eyes of others. Do not demand the sound of applause. The man who fights for attention has already given away his position. He has told the world, "Without your gaze, I am nothing." But I was not born to beg for eyes. I was not forged to shout for validation. I am not a banner. I am not a show. I am the wind behind the mountains, silent, unseen, but shaping everything. There is no greater mistake than mistaking noise for significance. There is no deeper weakness than mistaking presence for power. The general who longs to be noticed on the battlefield draws arrows to his chest. The soldier who steps forward to be admired is first to be struck down. And the man who fights for attention will always be fighting. Because attention, once tasted, becomes an addiction louder than war. So I withdrew, not out of fear, but strategy. I left the feast, I stepped back from the firelight, and I stood where silence lives. Let others perform, let others pose, let them hunger for the moment. I will wait for something longer, the echo that remains after all voices fade. If you need to be seen to feel powerful, then you have no power. Because true power operates in absence. It creates fear without showing form. It moves nations without lifting its hand. It bends the room without ever entering. I studied this not in books, but in war. I watched kingdoms fall because their kings needed admiration. I watched soldiers die because their leaders wanted to be worshipped. And I saw that every man who bled for validation had already died long before the blade touched his skin. Instead, I mastered the art of subtraction. I learned to remove my presence so that it became more valuable than my presence ever was. And every time I vanished, my silence did the speaking. A general once asked me, "How can you lead men if you are not seen?" I smiled. I said nothing, and yet he followed. Because the wise do not follow noise. They follow gravity. And gravity needs no speech. Attention is not taken. It is earned through void. It is not captured by shouting louder, but by creating space so sharp, so disciplined, so rare, that when you appear, the world listens, not because you forced them, but because your absence made them curious. Look around. The loud are predictable. The performers exhaust themselves. The ones who chase fame must keep feeding it, or it turns on them like a starving dog. But the quiet man, the absent one, he is not hunted. He is studied. He is whispered about. He becomes a mystery, and mystery always lasts longer than attention. When I walk through the world, I walk like the moon, cold, high, silent. I do not burn like fire. I reflect, I observe, and because I do not fight to be seen, I am noticed more. To win without fighting, you must master the battlefield. But to win without appearing, you must master the mind. This is the deeper war, the one where you erase your presence so thoroughly, others build temples in the shape of your shadow. Absence creates weight. Presence, once overused, becomes cheap. A man who is always available is never valued. A leader who is always speaking is eventually ignored. And a warrior who shows every move cannot surprise. So I became the silence. I became the gap between movements. I became the one who isn't there, and because of that, I am everywhere. They ask, where is he now? They wonder, what is he planning? And their uncertainty is the battlefield I control. This is not retreat. This is power reformed. This is presence reborn through absence. Stop fighting to be seen. Stop shouting to be heard. Withdraw, and let your absence teach them who you are. Because when you return, even once, the silence will shatter and the world will lean in. Not because you demanded it, but because they waited. Because they missed you. Because in your absence, you became unforgettable. And that is victory. I have watched empires crumble under the weight of their own noise. Kingdoms that could have endured for centuries, torn apart by leaders who could not resist the urge to speak. They flooded their people with proclamations, decrees, and commands until their voices became like background wind, constant, dull, and ignored. They thought repetition was power. They thought volume equaled influence. But the truth is quieter. The truth is measured. And truth, when spoken too often, loses all sharpness. The sharpest blade is the one you don't see. The most dangerous warrior is the one you never hear. And the most powerful man in the room is the one who says nothing, yet changes everything by merely being there. When you become predictable, you become dismissible. When you are always present, you become part of the furniture. And when you constantly raise your hand to be noticed, you become the child in the room, not the commander. So I crafted my power through distance. Not emotional distance, strategic distance. I would enter only when needed. I would speak only when silence could no longer serve me. I would appear only when the timing was so precise, my presence would split the moment in half. This is the difference between performance and positioning. The performer dances for attention. The strategist controls it. You do not chase the spotlight. You make it move to you. This is how empires are formed, not through loud proclamations, but through quiet arrangements, silent gestures, invisible alliances. You do not need to be in the center to shape the center. You only need to influence those who are. I once sent a single messenger into enemy territory with no army behind him. Just a scroll, blank. No message, no threat, just silence wrapped in mystery. The opposing general lost sleep for 3 days trying to decipher it. He canceled his campaign. I did not raise a sword. I did not speak a word. I let absence do what armies could not. And this is the lesson most men never learn. Because most men are terrified of being forgotten. They believe attention is survival. But that belief is the leash around their neck. It makes them loud when they should be still. It makes them impulsive when they should be patient. It makes them expose themselves over and over until there is nothing left but a hollow version of who they were pretending to be. Do not build your life on visibility. Build it on weight. Be the kind of person who, even when gone, is still considered. Think of the ancient ones, the warriors whose names we speak centuries after their bones returned to dust. It is not because they shouted. It is not because they begged. It is because they moved with precision, appeared with meaning, and disappeared with mastery. There is a rhythm to power. It is not constant. It is not noise. It is absence, presence, absence again. You must become like a tide. You must withdraw so your return feels like a shift in the world's axis. If you never leave, they will never feel the change. Some call it mystery. I call it advantage. Some call it detachment. I call it control. There is strength in being unreadable. There is dominance in being unclocked. If they can't predict you, they can't prepare. And if they can't prepare, you have already won half the battle. Absence is not invisibility. It is strategic reduction. It is subtracting yourself from the noise so you rise above it. I have spent years saying less, doing less, revealing less, but each movement, each word, each step I do make strikes deeper than the loudest shout. Because it carries weight. Because it was chosen, not thrown. Never let them grow used to you. Never let them pin you down with definition. Become fluid. Become rare. Become necessary, but not accessible. Do not post every thought. Do not show every moment. Let your stillness become a storm they cannot interpret. Let your absence become an echo they chase through the night. This is how you win attention, not by fighting for it, but by making it feel like the only light in a room you rarely enter. That is presence reborn. That is reputation without noise. That is power, drawn from the void. There was a man who stood at every village gate, yelling his name, declaring his wisdom, swearing he would change the world, and yet no one followed him. Why? Because the more he spoke, the less he meant. His words were like wind over dust, stirring, but never shaping. The world has no memory for the loud who say nothing, only for the still who embody everything. And so I learned, if I must choose between being seen and being felt, I will always choose to be felt. Sight fades, feeling remains. What is seen can be ignored. What is felt becomes part of them. This is why I step back, why I disappear. Because silence plants roots. Absence takes hold in the mind. And when you are no longer there, they start asking questions. Where did he go? What is he planning? Did we miss something? In their questioning, you rise. In their uncertainty, you gain form. I've watched men rise to power by vanishing at the right time. I've seen kings shake a room by walking away. Because absence is not weakness. It is the sculptor's hand, shaping perception by removing excess. You don't need to carve more. You need to take away until only power remains. A good reputation is not built in your presence. It is built in the space you leave behind. This is why I leave rooms before applause, why I do not explain myself more than once, why I do not correct every misunderstanding, because the more you try to be understood, the less mysterious you become. And mystery is leverage. When they think they know you, they stop preparing for you. But when they can't read your next step, they hesitate. That hesitation, even for a second, is the window where you strike. Not always with a sword, sometimes with a single word. Sometimes with a silence so heavy it bends the room. I once withheld a reply for 7 days during a negotiation. Not because I was indecisive, but because my silence was louder than their pressure. They folded, not because I argued, but because I refused to be pulled into their tempo. Power is not reacting. It is choosing your timing so ruthlessly that the world must adjust to your rhythm. Most people are slaves to tempo. They speak when spoken to, post because others post, reply because they're afraid of silence. They call it engagement. I call it surrender. Let the crowd clap for each other. Let them cheer, argue, trend, vanish. I remain still, watching, refining, recalibrating. When I speak, they will remember. Because I do not give them what they expect. I give them what they feel before they even understand it. And this is why absence works. Because it builds anticipation. Because it starves them of predictability. Because it forces them to lean in, to wonder, to doubt themselves. Never underestimate what mystery does to the human mind. It unlocks projection. It causes them to assign more value to what they do not fully see. They begin to imagine your strength, and often what they imagine is greater than what you could show. This is why legends grow in absence, why myths form around those who disappear. When you leave no trail, they create one for you. And their version of you, that imagined figure, becomes more influential than any speech you could have given. I have won more battles with restraint than I ever did with force. And yet most men still rush in, still speak first, still try to prove. But you don't prove strength. You let it be noticed through omission. You do not force eyes toward you. You position yourself in such a way that their eyes find you, even when they're trying not to. This is what makes them respect you, not because you fought for it, but because you withheld it. Let them reach. Let them guess. Let them fill the silence with their own narrative. Because the story they write in your absence is often the one that cements your legacy. So I remain quiet. Because quiet commands, I remain still. Because stillness provokes, and I remain absent. Because absence, when chosen, becomes the loudest presence in the room. You must understand, attention is currency. And like all forms of currency, its value collapses when it's printed without limit. The more you spend yourself showing up in every conversation, reacting to every provocation, sharing every move, the less valuable your presence becomes. It is not just about being rare, it is about being deliberate. The most respected leaders I've encountered did not fill the air with their thoughts. They created a vacuum where every word mattered. They were not available to everyone all the time. They understood the rule: availability dilutes authority. If they can access you anytime, they stop respecting your time. If they know what you'll say before you say it, they stop listening. If you show up for every battle, you are not feared. You are expected, predictable, common, disposable. So I train my mind like I train a blade, to resist unnecessary motion, to be still unless summoned by strategy. I withdraw to create scarcity. I delay to create pressure, and I vanish to gain weight. This is not manipulation. It is discipline. The discipline of not needing to be seen in order to exist. The discipline of trusting that your value increases when you stop feeding the fire of attention. There is an illusion in the world today that relevance equals presence, that if you're not constantly showing up, you're being forgotten. But this is a shallow understanding of power. True power doesn't come from visibility. It comes from gravitas. And gravitas cannot be faked. It is built slowly, patiently, by mastering when to speak and when to disappear. When you are constantly visible, you become part of the background. When you vanish strategically, you create contrast. And contrast is how the eye notices. It's not brightness that draws attention, it's darkness pierced by light. Think of the moon. It glows not because it screams, but because it reflects. It says nothing. It does not burn. Yet every creature on earth looks up at it in awe. Why? Because it is silent. Because it disappears and returns on its own terms. Because its rhythm cannot be rushed. Become like this. Do not orbit others. Make them orbit you. Let your absence shape their anticipation. Let your reappearance feel like a shift in gravity. I have made enemies tremble simply by waiting. I have gained loyalty not through speeches, but by withholding access. I have commanded respect by refusing to explain myself twice. These are not arrogant moves. They are strategic. Because every time you step forward, you spend a piece of your mystery. And when your mystery is gone, so is your leverage. The loudest man is often the most desperate. The one who explains himself the most is the one least sure of who he is. And the man who shows up everywhere is often the one with no center. But the man who is felt, even when absent, he is the one with true gravity. He bends the actions of others without touching them. He shapes the conversation by not joining it. He becomes the reference point, the unseen anchor, the silent center of movement. I have learned to disappear at the peak of the moment, before the applause, before the tension resolves, because that is how memory is forged, not in satisfaction, in tension, in curiosity, in what they didn't get to see, in what they wish they had understood. Do not give the world all of you. Give them the outline and let them fill it with reverence. And when you return, let it feel like thunder after months of drought. Not because you raised your voice, but because the silence before you was long enough to make them thirsty. That is how absence becomes presence. That is how you win without fighting for eyes. And that is how you make them remember. They asked me once, if you have the power, why not show it? And I replied, What is the point of a weapon if the enemy already knows how you'll strike? Power revealed too early invites resistance. Power unveiled too often invites rebellion. But power withheld, observed only in its consequences, not in its demonstration, becomes mythic. You must understand this. Attention is not influence. Attention is exposure, and exposure without control is danger. A bright flame draws not just warmth, it draws wind, insects, rain. What starts as light ends as exhaustion. I do not seek to be seen. I seek to be regarded. Regarded is different. It is not just a glance. It is a mental posture. To be regarded is to command the inner thoughts of others. And that is something noise can never do. Most men want to be the storm. I prefer to be the pressure that comes before it, the eerie silence, the change in the wind, the force they feel but cannot locate. That is influence without exposure. That is presence built on restraint. There is an ancient story about a warrior who never lost a duel. He carried a blade of obsidian, sharpened once every 10 years, never drawn unless his life demanded it. Many mocked him for his stillness, for his avoidance of unnecessary battles. But when the war came, the real war, his silence spoke first, and his silence killed last. That man became legend, not because he fought often, but because he fought less. The less you reveal your power, the more devastating its arrival. Absence is not retreat, it is investment. You are storing weight, saving mystery, gathering force. You become like a mountain, unmoving, unspoken, but undeniable. Let me tell you this truth. The world is crowded with men who bleed for screens, who dance for clicks, who compete for moments that vanish in seconds. They hunger for now, and in doing so, surrender all tomorrows. Their names rise briefly, burn hot, then fade, forgotten, replaced, scattered like ash in the wind of attention's fickle breath. But those who practice strategic absence do not rise fast. They rise deep, like roots, and what is rooted cannot be shaken. This is why I do not show everything I know, why I do not answer every challenge, why I let some insults pass untouched. Because the moment you respond, you confirm your opponent's relevance. But when you remain unmoved, they shrink. They tire themselves in your silence. They waste arrows on a ghost. And then, one day, when your foot finally touches the field, the entire landscape tilts. You are not fighting for applause, you are waiting for effect. When you speak after long silence, the room listens not because of your volume, but because they know your words are rare. When you appear after long absence, even your walk carries pressure. When your actions are few but flawless, every step becomes a signal. Every silence, a threat. Every glance, a shift. This is how I win battles without drawing swords. This is how I lead armies without raising my voice. This is how I hold loyalty without begging for it. Because my power is not shown, it is felt. I do not mark my territory like the beasts of the forest. I let the trees lean in my direction. I let the wind shift when I breathe. And those who know, truly know, understand that power built on silence does not shake when tested. It absorbs the strike. It waits. And then it answers once. Enough to end the war. You do not need to speak often to be heard. You do not need to show often to be feared. You only need to move when it counts. That is the difference between spectacle and strategy, between noise and presence, between chasing eyes and commanding minds. I have learned that silence is not absence of sound. It is the presence of control. It is not simply the withholding of speech, but the conscious choice to let the world run out of noise before you speak. Most men fear this. They rush to fill silence with opinions, with explanations, with defense. But silence is not a void. It is a position. And in war, as in life, position is everything. There is a reason the strongest formations do not move first. They wait. They let the impatient charge, reveal, exhaust. And then, when the enemy believes the battle is already his, the quiet one stands and changes everything. That is what silence does. It lets others reveal themselves. It lets their strategy unfold and unravel while yours remains hidden. This applies not only to battlefields, but to every room you enter. When you do not speak immediately, people begin projecting. They fill your silence with their insecurities, assumptions, hopes. They begin reacting to your quiet as if it were a message. And it is. It's the clearest message you can send. I do not need your validation to exist. I am here on purpose, and I am patient. When a man is truly confident, he does not reach. He does not grasp. He waits, because he knows gravity works in silence. It is the unseen pull that moves mountains and tides without ever raising a hand. This is why I do not speak my plans aloud. This is why I do not broadcast every move. Because when you tell the world what you are doing, you lose control over how they react. But when you say nothing, when you operate from absence, every outcome becomes leverage. If you succeed, you appear as a storm, sudden and overwhelming. If you fail, they never saw it coming. Either way, you remain untouchable. Reputation, like power, grows in the shadows. It does not need the spotlight. It needs results, results that speak in the room long after you've left it. And when people begin to whisper your name in meetings you didn't attend, when your decisions echo in places you've never stood, you will understand the true meaning of influence. It is not about taking the stage. It is about building a stage so strong they perform on your terms, even in your absence. I have seen leaders collapse under the weight of their own visibility. They made themselves too available, too explainable, too constant. And like anything overexposed, they became dull, familiar, replaceable. But when you are rare, when you are seen only in moments of precision, you remain sharp in their minds. You become a standard, not just a presence. You become a compass, even when you're not in the room. To disappear is to become unforgettable, if done with intention. And that is the key. Intention. Not hiding out of fear, not vanishing from weakness, but withdrawing to consolidate power, to observe, to wait for the right strike. This is not cowardice. This is calculation. I do not vanish to escape the fight. I vanish to decide which fight is worth my blade. And when I draw it, the war is already over. This applies to relationships, to business, to any place where humans gather. Do not flood the space. Do not force your voice into every gap. Let others be loud. Let them burn their presence dry. Then, when the silence falls, and it always does, your words will land like a blade through still water. Sharp, undeniable. Power is not what you say. Power is what happens when you finally say it. And attention, true, lasting attention, is not taken with force. It is earned through stillness, through absence, through becoming the moment they didn't see coming, but could not forget. So I move like shadow, speak like stone, and vanish like breath, because when I return, the world will not just listen, it will wait. The man who is always speaking is easy to silence. The man who is always present is easy to ignore. But the man who withholds, who speaks only when the silence has matured, who enters only when the space begs to be filled, that man becomes unforgettable. He does not demand attention. He alters the weight of the room by standing still. I once walked into a hall of kings, each adorned with gold, their voices echoing like trumpets. They debated, shouted, laughed too loudly, convinced that noise equaled authority. I remained by the pillar, silent. They noticed me before I said a word. Why? Because I didn't try to be noticed. In a world of performance, restraint is power. You must not confuse motion with progress. Many move loudly, but go nowhere. Many shout truths, yet persuade no one. It is not the man who yells the truth who shifts minds. It is the one who lives it quietly, relentlessly, with discipline that makes others question their own. Your presence is a currency, and like all currency, it is subject to inflation. Spend it too often, and it becomes worthless. But spend it with calculation. Enter only when the impact is inevitable, and your very arrival becomes an event. There is no strategy in needing to be seen. There is strategy in knowing you'll be remembered, even if they never saw your hand move. This is why I don't correct every rumor. Why I don't defend every accusation. Because when you explain too much, you admit their words have weight. But when you remain still, unmoved, their accusations become echoes, and echoes fade. In leadership, the same law applies. If you answer every complaint, you lose the room. If you justify every command, you hand over authority. But when you remain anchored, calm, firm, they will begin to find their answers in your silence. They will sense the depth of your thought, not by the noise you make, but by what you choose not to say. Your silence teaches them how to hear you, and your absence teaches them how to miss you. This is how loyalty is born, not through constant presence, but through earned presence. When your return feels like relief, when your words arrive like water in drought, when your touch solves what no amount of noise could fix. Understand this. The world is filled with men who fight for stage time, who beg to be heard, who count their relevance by how many are watching. But I am not in that war. I am in the war of timing, the war of shadows, the war of consequence. I do not want their eyes. I want their respect. And respect is not given to the ones who always speak. It is reserved for the ones who speak when it matters. So I train myself to pause, to withhold, to watch a moment become ripe before I act. Because attention gained too early is wasted. It arrives before your blade is sharp, before your step is sure. But attention gained after silence, after withdrawal, after preparation, that attention becomes loyalty. It becomes fear. It becomes reverence. Let them forget you for a season. Let them think you faded, and then return with something so aligned, so powerful, so precise, that the world reorients itself around you. Not because you fought for it, but because your absence left a space that only you could fill. And that is how you win the long game. I do not believe in chasing, not in battle, not in conversation, not in life. When you chase, you announce dependence. You reveal a weakness, a need, a fracture in your foundation. And the wise, the predators, the rivals, they see that weakness. They circle it, they wait, and they strike. So I do not chase attention. I remove myself. I create a vacuum, not to be dramatic, but to test gravity. If my silence pulls you toward me, then I never needed to shout. If it doesn't, then you were never aligned to begin with. Absence is the battlefield where real loyalty is measured. I've seen alliances dissolve the moment one party stops feeding attention to the other. I've seen friends vanish when applause dies. I've seen empires crumble under the weight of needing to be liked. But I have also seen silence reveal truth. The one who waits for your return is the one worth keeping. The one who forgets you in your absence was only tethered to your visibility, not your essence. This is why I step back, why I disappear, because I want what remains when the performance ends. Not everyone deserves your full presence, and not every battlefield deserves your blade. Just because a war is loud doesn't mean it's worth fighting. Just because they're looking doesn't mean you need to respond. True power is knowing when not to act. I once sat across from a ruler who believed volume was victory. He filled the room with plans, visions, declarations. And yet, when the storm came, he was the first to fall. Not because he lacked strength, but because he had no stillness, no reserve. He had spent everything on being seen. I learned from his failure. Reserve is not retreat. It is strategy. It is building an internal fortress that does not need the world's constant approval. It is becoming so rooted in your own presence that you can walk away from any stage and not shrink, but grow. Your withdrawal teaches them to value your return. If you never leave, your presence is assumed. But when you vanish, when you choose the shadows over the spotlight, you teach them what they forgot. That presence is a privilege, not a promise. And in your absence, they remember. They remember the silence you carried. They remember the decisions you made without noise. They remember how you made them feel without ever trying to impress. This is what builds legend, not noise, not appearances, but memory. And memory is sharpened in silence. It is not forged in 1,000 interactions. It is carved by one unforgettable absence, a void so sharp that only you can fill it. So let them wonder. Let them ask, where did he go? Let them scroll, search, whisper. Because when you return, it will not be to reintroduce yourself. It will be to remind them of who they were in your shadow. And that is how absence becomes power. Not through emptiness, but through design. Through choosing not to appear until the moment your presence reshapes the room. There's a moment in every campaign, whether on the battlefield or in life, when the wise man feels the urge to press forward, to show his strength, to claim his space. And that is precisely when he must stop. Because the impulse to be seen is often the death of advantage. In war, when you reveal your full formation too early, the enemy calculates you. They adapt. They prepare. But when you hold back, when you move just enough to provoke but never enough to explain, you create anxiety in your opponent. And anxiety is a more powerful weapon than the sword. I have watched seasoned warriors fall, not from wounds, but from pressure. From the haunting uncertainty of an enemy who does not show his face. That is the power of absence. It makes the mind fight itself. When I disappear, it is not to hide. It is to let them reveal. The need for attention makes people impulsive. But the patience of absence makes them honest. When they think you're not watching, they show who they are. When they believe you've left the field, they drop their guard. And in that lowering, they hand you the keys to their weakness. I have walked among people who underestimated me because I said little. They mistook silence for emptiness. They filled the space with assumptions, and those assumptions became traps of their own design. By the time they realized the silence was deliberate, it was already too late. Let others talk. Let others post. Let others pose and flash and spin. You will outlast them, not by matching their volume, but by being the weight that never moved. Reputation is not the art of being known. It is the art of being trusted when you're not there to explain yourself. And trust, deep trust, is built when others experience your absence and still feel your presence. When they ask, "What would he do?" and your silence answers them. That is power embedded, not performed. Influence without effort. Presence without noise. There are seasons when your absence will speak louder than your success. Seasons when disappearing becomes more compelling than dominating. You must recognize them. You must respect them. Because timing is the supreme commander. You cannot rush reverence. You cannot force respect. You build it in shadows. You build it in discipline. You build it by choosing not to react when the world screams for reaction. This is how I have won wars before they began, how I have led without stepping forward, how I have crushed opposition without raising my voice. By mastering the space between appearances, by weaponizing the weight, by turning absence into tension and tension into transformation. Do not be addicted to being seen. Be addicted to being remembered, because sight fades, but memory, that is carved in the stillness you left behind. So I keep stepping back, not because I am unsure, but because I am certain of what silence creates, certain of what absence commands, certain that the less I show, the more I become. I have never feared invisibility, because I understand what most men do not. Invisibility is not the absence of impact. It is the accumulation of it. The unseen hand can move an empire. The unheard thought can change a generation. And the man who masters absence does not disappear. He multiplies in the minds of others. They remember you differently when you're gone, not because they knew you well, but because they wish they had. Absence rewrites you in their memory, not with accuracy, but with intensity. Your stillness becomes strength. Your silence becomes certainty. Your delay becomes design. When you retreat, the world recalculates. And in that recalculation, you rise. This is the law I live by. The one who controls absence controls attention. The one who does not fight for the stage becomes the stage itself. And the one who is not everywhere becomes the place they all turn to. So I do not post to be praised. I do not show up to be counted. I do not rush into rooms to be acknowledged. I enter only when the room needs redefining. Every time I vanish, I grow sharper. Every time I withhold, I gain clarity. Every time I delay my move, the world reveals more of itself, until I can strike without doubt, without effort, without loss. And when I strike, it is not to impress. It is to end. This is how you win attention, not by joining the noise, but by being the reason it stops. Not by chasing their eyes, but by standing where their eyes must land. Not by being seen, but by being needed. They ask, how did he do it? How did he win without speaking? How did he become so known without ever explaining himself? The answer is simple. I did not fight for attention. I earned it by absence.